Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. So back in March of last year, it's crazy to say last year, back in March of last year when the pandemic started, people were freaking out. What were they freaking out about? They're like, we're not going to have enough masks. How are we going to get masks? We're not going to have enough masks. So at the time, my wife actually made some masks for us, which is something a lot of people did. But eventually, we got enough masks. So how did that happen? How did that happen? And it happened pretty fast. I mean, I would say within about a month or two, there were more than enough masks to go around. And then I read the other day that we're going to have 1.5 billion masks floating around the oceans, which sounds a bit high. But I said at the time, if people think they can make money by producing masks, they're going to produce masks. And that's capitalism. That's capitalism, right? If you're, I don't know. If you're a company that makes medical devices or something like that, if you're Johnson & Johnson and you're like, gosh, there seems to be some demand for masks and we can give you a box of 50 masks for $15 and we can make like $3 a box and we can sell 50 million boxes, then that seems like a pretty good idea. At the time, I said, don't worry about the masks. We will have enough. The free market will ensure that we have enough masks at the right place at the right time. And I said, we'll also have enough toilet paper and we'll have enough ventilators. All these things that we had shortages of, it all worked out. Everything worked out fine. And it really did work out fine. Now, coronavirus hasn't worked out fine. We're over 300,000 deaths. That hasn't worked out fine. But at least this other stuff, the masks, the ventilators, all this other stuff, it worked out fine. The free market did its job. Now, can you imagine if somewhere high up in the government, we had a mask czar that was telling companies to produce masks and telling them where to ship them and controlling the whole thing in a centrally planned fashion? It would have been a disaster. And if you think about the magic of this, the thousands of people involved that don't even know each other, complete strangers, each working for their own benefit, from the people who harvested the cotton to the people who made the rubber for the elastic bands, to the manufacturers who assembled the masks, to the trees that were cut down to make the cardboard boxes that they were shipped in, to the automakers that build the trucks that drove them, to the oil companies that drilled for the oil that was refined into gasoline for the trucks. All of this was done on time in the right place. And within a few weeks, people had enough masks. That is the miracle of capitalism. Now, we talked about this before. I read the Jeff Jacoby article. By the way, Jeff Jacoby is still working for the Boston Globe. I followed him on Twitter. And he wrote that piece giving thanks for capitalism. And he talked about the economics of Thanksgiving dinner and the fact that on Thanksgiving, when you go to the grocery store, there are turkeys waiting for you. There's actually I back when I was like going down this libertarian rabbit hole on Facebook, I actually saw a pretty good meme, and it said, what did it say? It said, in socialism, you wait for bread. In capitalism, bread waits for you. And it had pictures of like a bread line, and it had pictures of bread in the grocery store. But yeah, I mean, on Thanksgiving, you just take it for granted that you go to the grocery store and there's going to be turkeys waiting there for you. And it happens every year, and we take it for granted and we don't think about what a miracle it is. that all of this, from the packaging of the turkeys to the store itself to the people who slaughtered the turkeys, like all of this has to be intricately coordinated, but nobody coordinated at all. It's the invisible hand. This is Adam Smith's The Invisible Hand. And that's what happened with the mass. Nobody coordinated it. Everybody was working for their own benefit, and we got the mass on time and in the right place, which is a miracle. But it's not a miracle. That is the miracle of capitalism. Now, usually if you find that markets aren't functioning, it's because there is some form of human intervention. Disasters in economics are never natural. They're all man-made. Anytime you see economics malfunctioning, that is a man-made disaster. Now, my favorite example of this, of intervention in the markets, was in 2008 when the SEC banned short selling in financial stocks during the financial crisis. So financial stocks were going down, and there was this perception that people were shorting them, so they simply banned short selling. The idea was that you had these evil short sellers that were betting on these stocks to go down, so they banned short selling. Created all kinds of problems because then you had market makers and options that need to be able to short stocks and people who own convertible bonds that need to be able to short stock. It totally screwed up the market, and the bank stocks went down anyway. There is this idea of naive intervention. When you intervene in a complex system that you do not understand, the idea is that you do the opposite of what you intend to do. And an economy is a very complex system, and the stock market is a very complex system. I was actually going to write a book about this about 7 years ago, but I never could get it together. And I call this concept Costanza from the Seinfeld episode. And it's become a little bit of a cliche. People talk about this a lot, but in case you haven't heard of this, this is from the episode in Seinfeld, where when George Costanza figures out that if he does the opposite of what his instincts tell him to do, then everything works out great. So he just does the opposite. So we call it the Costanza. So an economy is an endlessly complex, interconnected system. And if you mess with just one part of it, it will screw the whole thing up. Now, I know somebody who went to the Soviet Union in the 1980s. This is a fascinating story. It's a fascinating story. And he went to a farm. And scattered around the farm were about 40 to 50 combines out in the fields, just sitting there rusting. And he thought that was strange. He's like, this is all this expensive farm equipment, and it's just sitting out there rusting. He said, what's with all the equipment laying around? Now, as it turns out, this is the Soviet Union, this is central planning. There was a part on the combines that kept breaking, but they couldn't get a replacement part to fix the combine, so they just kept ordering new ones, which would last until the part broke. And this is the waste and inefficiency in a command and control system. We have this idea that there is some omniscient bureaucrat who knows exactly what everyone needs, how much it costs, and at what time. Nobody is that smart. This is an endlessly intricate, complex, interconnected system. You can't intervene in it. This is why central planning doesn't work. It didn't work when Russia did it. And it doesn't work when the United States does it, Now, one form of intervention that actually ended up working out well was Operation Warp Speed. And obviously, Trump is persona non grata right now. But he did do some good things during his administration. And Operation Warp Speed to get a vaccine to market was an example of that. And in that case, the intervention was a non-intervention. He basically sped up the approval process with the FDA to get the drugs to market. And as you know, it takes about 10 years to get a drug to market in the United States because of the approval process at the FDA. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but capitalism has raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the last 20 years. Thousands of people are lifted out of poverty every single day. Does capitalism result in billionaires? Absolutely. It was funny. I was in Dunkin' Donuts the other day, and somebody had a bumper sticker that said billionaires should not exist. billionaires should not exist. Absolutely, billionaires should exist. Absolutely. But what we've talked about that on this show before. If you have a problem with somebody making a lot of money, that is a you thing. What we practice here in the United States isn't always capitalism. We subsidize certain industries. We're subsidizing the airlines right now, which is a big mistake. We tax other industries. We have tariffs and quotas. We have intervention after intervention, and it's actually gotten worse over time. We don't have a capitalist economy. We would have what you call a mixed economy, but it is still a fundamentally capitalist country that functions on market signals, and prices are market signals. As long as prices are allowed to fluctuate, we have a capitalist economy. If you mess with things long enough, market signals stop working, and that's when you have problems. And the reason prices are signals are, if the price of something is high, it is telling producers to produce more and for consumers to consume less. Let me say that again. If the price of something is high, it is telling producers to produce more and for consumers to consume less. If the price of something is low, it is telling producers to produce less and for consumers to consume more. If prices aren't allowed to fluctuate, then the signals don't work and the economy ceases to function. So be very careful anytime you hear someone talking about fixing the price of something, like capping it or putting a floor on it. We're talking about putting caps on interest rates, the most important price in the economy. Yes, we have floors on prices. We have a floor on the price of labor. It's called the minimum wage, and that also creates distortions. Anyway, the election turned into a bit of a referendum on capitalism. Neither candidate was especially capitalistic, but one was more than the other. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.